Hi, and welcome to the N1 Podcast. I am your host, Alex West, and today I'm joined by writer Jae Gongora of the 94 Feet Report. Jay has written an article about NBA expansion. First, we're going to talk about the tumultuous NBA offseason, and then we'll get into expansion teams later in. It's a little bit of a longer podcast, but it's definitely worth a listen. So, Brent, take us away. So I'm joined by my guest today, Jae Gongora. Jay, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Nice to have you on the show. This is your first time.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's an honor.
Yeah, thanks, man. So tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, who you work for.
Jae Gongora, a contributor for the 94 Feet Report. Like many, I was part of the second batch of writers to join on back in July. I've only put out one article, another one on the way, the one we're here to talk about today, coming out maybe tomorrow, maybe today, I'm not sure, about expansion teams coming to the NBA and some of the cities that you might find them in.
Cool. That's the life of the writer, I think. It'll be out tomorrow, maybe today, depends on how much I get done later. That's the writer's life.
Not sure. Yeah, editor is everything.
Yeah. All right, well, let's jump in. We're going to talk expansion, but let's talk about this tumultuous offseason first before we get started. And the big news of the week, what everybody's talking about, are these player rankings. Looks like number 30 through 11 came out this morning. And, of course, there's some controversy.
A little bit.
Kyrie Irving is number 25. And then the one that jumped off the page to me is Nikola Jokic, all the way up at number 16. Wow.
Yeah, he's really moving up the ranks.
Yeah, for somebody who hasn't played a tremendous amount of basketball or at a high level, boy, he really has jumped up there.
And I don't want it to seem like we're against Jokic. We are, as far as I'm concerned, supporters of the Jokic movement.
For sure.
But, 16 for third-year player seems, a little over the top.
It seems a little high for a guy who hasn't played in the playoffs. I mean, hasn't had those really significant minutes that sort of define a player. To put him up that high and to put him up, he's for frame of reference. If you haven't seen these, they're up on ESPN. They've been doing their top 100 players, and number 15 is John Wall. And number 17 is DeMarcus Cousins. So that's kind of the avenue that he's on there. And maybe it's a little high, and maybe it remains to be seen, but maybe it's not a little high for him. But I immediately saw that and went, wow, that's pretty high for a guy who hasn't done a lot.
It's a bold choice.
Let's see if it pays off for him.
Yeah. But as far as, we've said our piece about Jokic, but as far as point guards go, I think one mistake on this list would have to be Kyrie Irving at 25.
All right, Kyrie's 25. Too high, too low?
Too low.
All right.
For the first point I'm going to make, Blake Griffin, who may miss 2 months, 3 months, we're not sure. He's listed at 24.
All right.
So would you rather have a player for the whole year or half of it? That's my first question to ESPN.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me.
I can get behind Mike Conley, but if I'm being honest, I would pick Kyrie over Conley most days of the week.
So I think the thing about Kyrie is there's this interesting thing. There's this disconnect between we in the NBA Twitter sphere, writers, whatever, we like to talk about all the advanced metrics and all these things. And the thing about Kyrie is his defense is purely awful, but he scores at such an elite level that I feel like he oftentimes gets underrated. It's a very bizarre situation for me.
Yeah, it's complex.
Well, what's bizarre about it is that 3 months ago during the NBA Finals, we walked away particularly from the Eastern Conference Finals, where he lit up the Celtics in Game 4 when LeBron got in foul trouble, and it looked very, very scary for the Cavs for a second.
And it looked like they might get their second win, and then he took over.
Exactly, and then Kyrie, has that that outburst where he scored 41, he scored like 30 in the second half, whatever.
Right.
We walked away from that moment saying that Kyrie was probably the second or third best player in the Eastern Conference.
Definitely one of the best in the game.
And a very high-level scorer, somebody that who was pretty much peerless when it came to getting to the rim. And it feels like in the intervening months we've gone away from that, and we started to downgrade him as the trade request came out. And so I try not to speak on this as a Celtics fan. I try to speak on it as a basketball thinker.
Absolutely.
But it's bizarre to me that we went from he's the third best player in the Eastern Conference to, I don't know, seems like an even swap with Isaiah Thomas.
No, the same thing has happened to Kyrie, where his popularity, his ability might have been overblown going into the playoffs. Coming out of it, it's a counter reaction to people overhyping him, which is the same thing has happened to Draymond right now with everybody, with our own Patrick Oxford.
Okay.
Putting him ahead of Anthony Davis. You're seeing a rebuttal to that. People saying that Draymond might not even be in the top 25, if that, if top 45. It's the overreaction to the overreaction. And I think that's what we're seeing here with Kyrie. Is there's no way Kyrie Irving, with everything we've seen from him, the possibility, he's only 25. He's, potentially still getting better. And the potential with him is so much greater than people like other players, not to downplay them, but Kyle Lowry, who else you got on here?
Mike Conley, I mean.
Mike Conley. Mike Conley is as baseline as you get for point guards. He gives you what he gives you every year. He's consistent, but, there's not that upper level that you have with Kyrie, that next stratosphere that you're going to have with Kyrie and players like Steph Curry and LeBron and John Wall, as you've seen in the playoffs, who just take their games to another level. And I think that's the part where, in this list, ESPN's missed.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think that Wall, in particular, showed in the playoffs that he has another gear. Kyrie has shown it in successive playoffs that he has another gear. And I have to agree with you. I mean, Mike Conley's a great player, and I would want him on my team. But if it was Mike Conley or Kyrie on the board, I'm taking Kyrie.
Right.
All right, well, that's enough ESPN. We've given them too much credence, putting too much credence into their player rankings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk a little about the off season, about things that have gone on. What's been your what teams have moved up in your power rankings this off season with all the turnover?
Moved up my power rankings.
Yeah, who's gotten better?
First off, I think the immediate answer would be the Thunder.
Okay.
Who, while they put on a show, or at least Westbrook put on a show for most of the season, when they got to the playoffs, that show didn't look too hot when it came to the fourth quarter. And I think adding George is going to help significantly for them long-term and in the playoffs, even more than it might for a team like Houston, who also, technically upgraded at point guard with acquiring Chris Paul, which we'll see how both these things work out.
Right.
I really like their addition of Patrick Patterson.
Ooh.
Great deal. I know he's going to be out for a while, but I really like that move, especially at the price they got him at. Just adding George next to Westbrook in his off-ball ability, his shooting, his defense. I love it.
I totally agree with you. I think adding Paul George is a big help. I still feel like the Thunder's maybe one move away from the team that they're going to be. I'm not sure how this Steven Adams, Enes Kanter thing plays very well in the playoffs. So that feels to me like something's got to give there. Enes
Kanter has felt for the past 3 seasons like a man who's about to leave town.
Yeah.
And Sam Presti is like Danny Ainge in that way, where he always feels like, he's perpetually one move away from one move away. He's always doing something. He's always, he's got his ear to the streets, seeing who's available, who's not available. Always looking into who he can trade.
For sure. And I feel like that's where that's going to be one more move that happens in the offseason, because they have a lot of unanswered questions with both of those guys being free agents and possibly trying to hold on to them if they can. For a small market team, that's a huge thing.
Absolutely.
Who else besides the Thunder?
So not necessarily a team, but the Carmelo Anthony camp.
Okay.
For sure. Has increased notoriety, popularity, and their image, I would say, over the summer. this offseason has been great for the Carmelo Anthony brand.
For Hoodie Mello brand in particular.
Hoodie Mello, but by connection, Carmelo Anthony.
That's right.
The past 3 seasons have been just so depressing with Melo and the Knicks and everything. Jackson's gone. The Knicks are still terrible, but you put Carmelo in a hoodie, he looks like MJ all over again.
That's
right. Looks like the best off-ball shooter you ever seen. You never see him miss a shot.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Hoodie Mello does. So maybe he should work on a deal to get to play in the hoodie.
There's the movie The Legend of Bagger Vance, the Legend of Hoodie Mello.
Let me ask you a question, Jay. Will we see the season open with Carmelo Anthony on the Knicks?
Yeah, we will.
Okay.
He will play at least one game, or at least sit on the bench for one game of the Knicks season.
Okay.
Because there's no real incentive for the Knicks to take on Ryan Anderson's contract, and until the Knicks and Carmelo are open about trading him to the Trailblazers, which I would prefer, I don't think it's going to happen.
Certainly a more interesting fit, I think.
Absolutely.
A team that would rise immensely. I mean, did so well last season after the Nurkic trade. Has CJ McCollum, has Dame Lillard. Like, that's a good squad, and adding Melo to that would make a really, really potent team in the playoffs.
And speaking of which, my next team I have for the teams that I think improved themselves, not necessarily maybe in the offseason, but just over the course of the year and just improvement upon themselves, I would say is the Blazers.
Okay.
In my opinion. I have a really high opinion of what Yusuf Nurkic is going to do this season. I've seen some photos of him working out in the weight room. Everybody lose 20 pounds and they get 30 pounds of muscle over the offseason, but it looks legit with Nurkic. I've heard great things about him. Him and Lillard together. McCollum, of course, is a great shooter, great passer, and just them working together as like a big three of their own. And then with the potential of adding Hoodie Mello into that, it's
that's pretty immense. I mean, that's a pretty good team.
I love that lineup.
Even in a loaded Western Conference, that's a good team.
Right. It's at the very least, it's an interesting team.
All right, so that'll sort of foray into my next question is, what's been your favorite move of this offseason, or is it the future move of Melo to the Blazers that interests you the most?
My favorite move of the offseason would have to be the Sixers trading for the number 1 pick.
Okay.
For the past couple of years, like they've been nothing but bad mojo, bad moves. Moves to the future, and they finally make a move for now. They make moves for getting better right now, increasing their potential ability for this season, and not waiting for next year. And for someone who lives in the area, it is it's helped the fan base. It's helped people go to the games, everything and I think I saw something about season tickets selling out like in record numbers and like that. It was a great move for the team, great move for the city. There's a lot of hype around Markelle Fultz, a lot of hype around Ben Simmons. Of course, there's the questions about Joel Embiid's health, but it's still just a lot of excitement around the team, and them trading for the number 1 pick instead of just letting it ride like they normally would in previous years was I think the most beneficial move for that person, any particular team.
Yeah, I think that they missed out on they've done a couple of things that were maybe I wouldn't have done. Picking Julio Okafor when you already had 2 centers. There have just been things with Philadelphia in the past 5 seasons that you've just gone, huh? And I'm not even talking about the process, because the process, obviously, by netting these 3 picks has worked out pretty well. But there have been sort of ancillary things that seemed questionable, even at the time. And it's very nice to see them make the right move. The move that's just right there in front of them. Trade up, get Markelle Fultz, take Markelle Fultz, and put this team on the floor. And it's finally nice to see him switch gears like that.
Now, I do have to say I'm not the highest guy in Markelle Fultz. I'm not convinced about his projections or everything like that, but I do think he will at the very least be a nice fit around Simmons if he can ever develop a jump shot, if Embiid can stay healthy. I thought the perfect pick for them at 3 would have been Malik Monk. I would have, even though people projecting him at 9, 10, I saw some 6. I would have taken him at 3 if I was the Sixers. I felt that he fit what they were building perfectly. But because Fultz was obviously available at number 1, I understand the pick. I don't know if he's the best fit, but could be a great player. Simmons could be a great player, and Embiid can be a great player. I don't know if that's all going to work together. I don't know.
It's certainly an interesting question.
Yeah, I don't know. It might end up in the long run having to trade one of them out. I would think Simmons is probably the most likely one to get traded out at this point. Because I think they're even though they haven't signed into a deal, I think they're invested in Embiid. The whole city's invested in Embiid. So given that Simmons' lackadaisical attitude and he hasn't really connected to the city, the town, as like Embiid has clearly, and Simmons is the most likely party to exit the situation.
Yeah, I was sort of advocating the other way for Philadelphia. I was more in the trade down camp because while you said Malik Monk, his running mate at Kentucky, I felt like De'Aaron Fox was the natural fit for them. Was a guy who could control the offense, and I felt like if they traded down to 5 with Sacramento, they could pick up an extra asset and essentially do what the Celtics did with the 1 and 3. But I felt like Philadelphia could do it at 3 and 5 and get a player that I believe is one of the best in the draft. But either way, at least they've made steps going forward to put a team on the floor this year that is looking to win basketball games.
Yeah, hopefully. J.J. Redick coming in, Robert Covington, another year, getting better. Yeah, hopefully they make some steps this year. I personally think they could make some moves in the playoffs.
Yeah, particularly in the Eastern Conference being as weak as it is.
Yeah.
So who are your top 3 League Pass teams? League Pass, always a hot button issue. Who are you going to be watching on any given night on League Pass?
On any given night, my first answer would be the Sixers, but I have them on CSN, so I'm good.
Okay.
The Bucks are a team that I'm really interested in watching.
All right.
I like Giannis. It's just seeing him guide, take 3 steps and get from one end of the court to the other. Seeing how he and Jabari maybe mesh, seeing if they can get that to work together. Middleton working along maybe all 3 of them. Is Thon 35? Is he 25? Is he 15? No one knows. It doesn't matter. Can he actually play? Is Malcolm Brogdon going to be able to repeat it, or is he having a down year? The whole team is. I have high hopes for them, but I'm also concerned that you might see some regression, which is a lot of people's opinions about the team I've seen over the off season is that we're going to get some regression, or we could get an MVP season from Giannis. No one really knows.
Yeah, that's certainly interesting questions about Milwaukee because, like you alluded to, there are so many questions surrounding their future with can Jabari be healthy? Things as simple as that. Jabari off his second ACL tear.
Right.
The Rookie of the Year, Malcolm Brogdon, playing tremendously throughout the season, but he is 24 years old, so the ceiling's pretty limited. And then with Giannis, the ever looming question of what is his ceiling. So it'll be interesting to see what they can hit. And I most definitely agree with you that that's a League Pass team worth watching.
Absolutely. And do they trade Jabari is another question I have because have you seen the reports of him wanting a max extension?
I have seen that. I feel like it's a little bit of gamesmanship on both sides.
More than likely, but still, you got to capitalize on the value you have. And does trading him now make sense to the team to get an asset back, or does keeping him and trying to, make some sort of deal? I don't know.
Yeah, I was listening to the Ringer NBA show, and Kevin O'Connor was talking about that as well, and he said that probably the best case scenario is a short-term deal for Jabari to prove himself, and so it'll be interesting because it can work out any number of ways in such a way that the organization's obviously vested in their best interest, and then Jabari's trying to make as much money as he can on 2 torn ACLs. So that's a situation that's going to play out right before our eyes. He obviously is on the extension that has to be signed before the 17th because he's on the end of his rookie deal. So there's potentially some negotiation before the season even starts on that.
Yeah, I'm also interested in seeing what happens with Wiggins and his deal, because it makes sense for Minnesota to sign him, but also makes sense for Minnesota to not sign him, because how much value does he really add to their team?
Yeah.
Is it Towns that they're going to stick with, and he's going to be the main fixture of that team, or is it Wiggins?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly another team in the Minnesota Timberwolves that will be warranting watching on a nightly basis, adding Jimmy Butler, adding Jeff Teague to their young core. I'll be interested to see what happens, because I have said a number of times on the podcast that I think they're a move away from being the team that they're going to be, just because they don't have any shooting right now.
Yeah, they're all going to be living in the paint.
Yeah, which we have seen with Chicago is not a tremendously successful situation. Jimmy Butler playing with Dwayne Wade and Rajon Rondo. So what happens when Karl Anthony Towns is your best three-point shooter, and maybe Andrew Wiggins, who can be hot from time to time, but they certainly need some more floor spacing, and Jeff Teague was not the guy to provide that.
No, not at all.
All right, who else do you have on your league pass teams?
I have Portland. As you mentioned before, for the same reasons listed before. I'm very interested to see how they all mesh. As Nurkic, what he showed he was the last 20 games or so of the season. Can Lillard and McCollum be a force in the West now that the West has risen? It is, it's packed. It's the eighth seed might have 48 wins like they did. Was it 2014?
Yeah,
2013? The West is crazy this year, and the A seed might have a better record than the fourth seed in the East. And I'm really interested to see not like just all the dynamics of who makes the All-Star team, who gets what is it, All NBA?
Yeah.
And what is Portland capable of? What is their ceiling?
And I think that question, it runs double for guys like Nurkic and Lillard. McCollum, I think we sort of know who he is, but Lillard is a guy who always felt like he could take the lid off of it in big spots. He played so well, particularly in 2015 against the Rockets.
Right.
And then we have a lot of questions about Nurkic. He has been in bad shape in Denver. He clashed with Mike Malone. There's a lot of questions about his commitment to the game. So I think that he is one of the big questions. How much, like you said he lost 20 pounds. He's lifting weights, doing all this stuff, So those additions to his game are going to be really nice, but it all matters how he plays on the court. And in that very small sample size last year, he was fantastic with Portland. So I think that it's definitely worth watching.
He showed things in Portland that he'd never shown before, which is, a good thing and at the same time problematic. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what he's actually capable of. The new and improved use of Nurkic.
Yeah, exactly. Before we jump into expansion, which we are going to get to because you've been working hard on this article, one question for you. What's your hot take that NBA Twitter /Reddit /basketball people will disagree with?
How much time do we have?
As much as you need.
I might have a few, and you can tell me if I'm off hinge or whatever.
Listen, as long as you leave time to talk expansion, I always tell people when they come on the show, like, this is a hot take safe space. Like, you come here to say your crazy things. So if we end up with 20 minutes of you saying crazy things, then that's what the podcast is.
All right. So I put this out there on Twitter, and I had a few writers, maybe some editors for the 94 Feet Report, disagree with me. And in my opinion, that Klay Thompson is by far the better player compared to Jimmy Butler. What do you think?
Wow. It's a question I've never thought of until this moment. Which one? I mean, if the question's who I'd rather have on my team, then I totally agree with you. It's Klay Thompson. He does so much more. He generally creates off ball, but has shown flashes of those like 38-point quarters.
He's somebody that when he gets the ball, you're afraid of, and there's not many players like that in the league. And if Klay Thompson has the ball, he's somebody I'm covering as opposed to somebody running down the lane. Like, he's one of those players.
Yeah.
So Klay Thompson, like you said, if it's a question of who would I rather have, 100% of the time it's going to be Klay Thompson. I've seen the statistics. I've been shown the statistics. I've been yelled at for being wrong. No matter what, Klay Thompson, I legitimately believe is just a superior player and someone I'd rather have on my team than Jimmy Butler.
And I think success sort of bears that out. I mean, you could play that silly game that you always play, like what if you swap teams or whatever. But
right.
The fact of the matter is Klay Thompson has been in a situation, even before Kevin Durant, where he excelled in his role, both as a secondary scorer and as a secondary ball handler. And Jimmy Butler has had a lot more put upon his shoulders, but hasn't really shown nearly the grasp of the game when it comes to winning basketball games. Now, stats can bear out a lot of things, but at the end,
they're only half the story.
Exactly. At the end of the day, you have to win basketball games, and that's something Klay Thompson's done. So you're not going to get a lot of argument from me out of that. I mean, I certainly think you have a fair argument.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So I guess that wasn't as hot takey. Like, we're not going to fight like Stephen A. Smith on First Take.
Maybe that's better for radio. I don't know. There's some devil advocates in there.
That's right.
Okay. Next one. I'd rather have Steph Curry than Kevin Durant.
Okay, this is a good one. You're gonna have to give me the argument on this one. You might sway me, but initially my mind's saying no.
All right. So it's a similar argument to that of Klay Thompson, where he's somebody where he gets the ball and he's deadly from anywhere on the court. Like, something that's underrated about Steph Curry is his ability to finish by the basket. Like, he gets, praised and also ridiculed for being a three-point shooter, as people use it to qualify him as a great player, but then dequalify him, saying, well, he's only a shooter. Well, yeah, he's a shooter, but he can also hit it from 40 feet away from the basket. He can hit it from half court legitimately. But at the same time, he can get in the lane and finish right by the basket over 7-footers. Just not as good as Kyrie, but similarly to Kyrie. And he has an underrated eye, he has an underrated passing ability. And, Kevin Durant has this immense ability. He's probably the best shooter over 7 feet, listed at 6'9", whatever.
Yeah, right.
Right. So that, probably one of the best shooters, maybe the best. I don't know. I'm not going to qualify that here. Shooters over 7 feet. He too can finish from pretty much anywhere on the court. And he's shown us the past 2 seasons that he is, I would dare to say, elite defensive player. Although I don't know he has the passing ability. Also, the selflessness that maybe Steph has shown in past years, and the willingness to take on more or less for the benefit of the team that you've seen from Steph in the past 3 seasons to help his team get to the finals, and just the ability to I retweeted, I forget the guy's name, but he put up a stat of the famous Steph gravity, and you'll see 3 guys come towards Steph, and you don't get, like, when he's out behind the arc, and you just don't get that with other players. Like, there's a certain, it's more than basketball type feel with Steph, where it's a mindset that he puts opponents in on the court. When they see Steph lace up, when they see him put his jersey on, there's this maybe not present but underlying subversive fear of his ability to shoot from anywhere on the court, his ability to score from anywhere on the court. And because of this, and because of the backlash that we've also now we're seeing with Kyrie and Draymond, like, the backlash to his greatness has also lowered our opinion. Like, this is the guy that was unanimous MVP, what, a season ago?
Yep,
2 seasons ago?
Last season.
And I feel like he's at a place right now where he is undervalued for what it is, even though he just got paid, $206 million?
Yep.
And he's at a place where he is undervalued for what he instills in his team, what the emotional aspect that he brings to the locker room, and the fear that he puts in his opponents. It just, we can't forget the the mind games that he must have done to the Clippers and Doc Rivers and the nightmares that he has because of them. And Steph Curry in the regular season, the season that Kevin Durant left, he just destroyed the hopes and dreams of all of Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Just game after game, him and Clay together. And I feel like Steph, I would prefer to have Steph on my team than Durant.
Interesting way it's talking about his gravity and sort of the way he warps the defense, because that is what he does. I mean, just by existing, he changes how defenses have to move on the court. And,
exactly.
And when that happens, it creates passing lanes for him. It creates driving lanes. It creates spot ups for him to pull up and shoot, which he's so well suited to do from 30, 35 feet.
Could you imagine if Carmelo had Steph's shooting ability? He never let go of the ball. He'd just he'd shoot it up every time he got it.
And Steph's handles are very underrated.
Absolutely.
I still am probably going to disagree with you, and the sole basis of my argument is going to be, yes, you're totally right. Steph Curry warps defenses. He does all this, but Kevin Durant is 7 feet tall, and he can score in a myriad of ways. Right. He's a great shooter, but he's also crafted that tiny little like shimmy shake that he does on the baseline where he keeps the ball really high and just flips it in from 8 feet out. There are so many things that Durant does on the offensive end, and then when you turn around and go to the defensive end, he's a guy who, unlocked by Billy Donovan last season and then sort of learned his role under Steve Kerr this season, of the perfect small ball five, a guy who can defend the rim, who was a nightmare for the Spurs all through the Western Conference Finals. And so for me, while I totally see what you're saying, I just want the versatility that a Kevin Durant brings to the floor.
Understandable.
All right, do you have one more quick one? Because we got to do some expansion, but these hot takes are getting me. They're getting me, man.
All right, well, I got one that might rock you.
All right.
The Celtics should still be rebuilding.
Okay. I'll hear you out on this one.
All right, so this comes with another one. I don't think the Celtics teams of the past 3 seasons have been that good. Okay. Regardless of their record, their statistics, Isaiah Thomas's transformation into a messiah figure. I don't think the teams are that good, and we saw that when they made it to the playoffs. The Atlanta Hawks nearly, just destroyed the entire Celtics franchise with the demolition they put on the Celtics in 2015, 2016.
Crushed them.
That was terrible. That was agonizing to watch as a Celtics fan, because it was 30 points at halftime. It was terrible, and they were like Toronto in that way, where they were a regular season try-hard team, and they played well. They played well as a team in the regular season and got the wins they needed to win. But when it came time to actually square up and face teams that when moments that it mattered, the Celtics were demolished. And you saw it in the regular season against the Cavs, where they'd get knocked down by 40, 50 points by the Cavaliers. And they'd make it up in the fourth quarter when the Cavs rested their players. But, at no point were the Celtics really ever in many of those games. And, we saw players like Jay Crowder and Isaiah Thomas and Avery Bradley and Kelly Olynyk really shine in the Brad Stevens offense and defense. But really what we're seeing is players that are overachieving and playing to their absolute peak. But like we talked about Kyrie Irving and Mike Conley, there's no extra level that they were able to go to. Isaiah Thomas had to score 50 points in a regular season game just to help the Celtics beat the Miami Heat.
Yeah.
Who weren't, that great, to be honest. And there's been this aura on Twitter from accounts like Celtics Junkies, where you can find me in their mentions, telling them that just the misunderstanding of what this team was really is what bothered me, because it was supposed to be a rebuilding team, and they lucked out and they got Isaiah Thomas, who changed everything. And Brad Stevens is supposed to be coaching around the 31 team right now. But because of Isaiah Thomas and Jay Crowder developing into these, you know, almost all-stars, for Isaiah, he became an all-star. The whole trajectory of the team changed, but they still had the picks. So they got into this weird spot where they had to decide: are we going to compete or are we going to get these picks? And my personal preference, I suppose, would be the picks, because I would follow the model from building within. You know, while they've been trading out and they've been getting better players from outside, I prefer the model of the Golden State, where they built from within, they drafted well, they got great players, and they used their picks responsibly. And I think that Danny Ainge has done that the past few years. He's gotten what appear to be really good players. Jaylen Brown, he has good potential, but we'll see what happens. I really like a lot of their second-round picks the past 2 seasons. I was distraught when I heard that Ante Zizic was leaving the team, but I think the Celtics should still be rebuilding. I don't think they should be competing right now. I never thought that they should be competing right now. I would prefer a 30-win team.
So I'll disagree with you. First of all, I'll start by saying I actually 100% agree with you that the teams weren't nearly as good as they looked on paper, particularly last year's team. That right. The number of wins in the 50s was pretty deceptive for that team. But I'll sort of add a caveat to it. My caveat is that, to me, it speaks volumes about Brad Stevens as a coach. And this is going to be my jumping off point. So, Brad Stevens, fantastic coach. He's a guy who every player is a sponge, and he wrings all the talent out of him that he can, which is a phenomenal asset to have as a coach. It's something that Greg Popovich has excelled at for years. But having a guy like Brad Stevens sort of breeds success. Even in the younger years when it was young Marcus Smart and what was left of Rondo and Jeff Green in his first seasons, after the Big Three era ended, we won too many games, and it ended up with the sixth pick in the draft, which landed us Marcus Smart, as opposed to the first pick, which landed us Andrew Wiggins. So there's that. But the reason I'll disagree with you is this: I think that there is such a draw in the NBA for players to play with other good players. And it's very hard to develop that from within. Now, Golden State, through a myriad of ways, has done that. They've developed within. However,
that's what's going to happen in every situation, just like that kind of model.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I was going to say is they have done it so well and gotten so many picks right and gotten lucky in a number of times that it would be very hard to replicate that model.
Absolutely.
And I think I really like both the moves, and I'm not sure that this is a very great Celtics team. I mean, I'm not ready to put it on a big 3 plane or anything like that. But what I do think is when you add Gordon Hayward, when you add Kyrie Irving, you add Jason Tatum, what you have is a preponderance of quality players that can possibly lure an Anthony Davis and make it a very interesting situation. And that sometimes being a 50-win team is okay if there's one more move in the chamber. And I feel like there is. I feel like there's one more star they're going to go after. This Anthony Davis rumor's gone around, but I don't disagree with your initial point at all. But I think maybe what I'm trying to say, I think that it's still a work in progress, but at some point you have to begin to progress away from the 30-win team.
And my problem wasn't with like this team that we have now. Like I'm okay with this team. It's it's decent. It's not going to break any banks or anything like that. But my problem was with people in Boston, outside of Boston, saying that the Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, Marcus Smart, Avery Bradley led team, all it needs is one star, and that was just never going to happen, never going to be accurate.
I totally agree with that. People who watched it, I mean, you sound like somebody who has watched a good number of Celtics games. I probably watched 40 or 50 last season. Like, you knew what the problems were. You knew that having your best scorer be 5'9" and have to get in the lane and have to rely on guys like Jay Crowder, who apparently hasn't ever hit a corner 3 from what I've seen. I mean, I watched all these games and people talk about it's turned into this bizarre thing of where Jay Crowder was underrated when he's a Celtic, and now he's colossally overrated.
I don't want to turn into Celtics Twitter, but it has seemed like a whole bunch of the the basketball Twitter universe has turned Jay Crowder into a Paul George light.
Yeah, like he's the best
Isn't the
3-and-D
case.
player in the league when in the playoffs sometimes he could barely score. I mean, when you're watching a Celtics game and Jay Crowder catches a pass on the corner and you go, "Oh no." Like that's not the guy you want. I mean, and every Celtics fan can tell you that. And so I totally agree with you. This was just very overrated. This was very high achievement by Brad Stevens, and I'm not sure what it all meant, except for it landed Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward. So maybe it'll land the next piece in what will be a Celtics dynasty. I mean, dynasty is such a very strong word, but what I mean to say is a team that rises above the conference finals in terms of level of success.
Right.
All right, let's talk about NBA expansion. That's what we got you here for.
Let's do it.
You brought these great hot takes in. You got me all off track now because I want to talk hot takes. But
Gotcha.
You write this article about
I do.
NBA expansions, and you've done all this research for it. So let's talk about it. And my first question is, what cities are good fits for teams right now?
Well, as people can read in the article coming out either today or tomorrow, I did a lot of reading into cities that would and wouldn't be good fits for an NBA expansion team. Some of them that I found that I think would be good fits were, for starters, Las Vegas, which just started their first National Hockey League team.
Right.
I'm sure, as everyone knows, they're bringing in the Raiders next season. And based on the economy, the projected job growth, the demographics of age and median income, Las Vegas seems like a really good fit for an NBA team. And as I say in the article, even possibly a better fit than both the NHL and NFL team that are already on their way there. And the success of the Las Vegas Summer League, the notoriety that any team in Las Vegas would bring to the league and to the team itself, I think is a good, it's a good location for an expansion. The proximity to Los Angeles, I didn't go to the Summer League, but I saw, a lot of people from Los Angeles, a lot of people from Texas, and all over the country came to Summer League and were more than willing to travel to Las Vegas to go see a basketball game. And then, but you have everything else around, entertainment-wise, that where people are more inclined to fly out to Las Vegas to see a game than they would possibly be to fly out to Oklahoma City to see a game. And because there's the ability to make it like a full trip. And as you might read in the article, that Las Vegas is one of the better cities that I found as a possible landing spot for an NBA team.
I think it's interesting that the metro area of Las Vegas has gone from no professional teams just a couple of years ago to now 2, and then maybe sometime in the future the possibility of 3. But it speaks to the demographic of the city that, like you said, there are things to do all the time. Las Vegas is an attraction city. It's got casinos, it's got shows, it's got all these things. And then the other part of it, on top of the attraction of the city itself, is that it's cheap to fly to Las Vegas by the same very token. I saw an interesting thing the other day that said if you lived in downtown Oakland, it would actually be less expensive to fly to Las Vegas, take an Uber to the stadium, watch a Raiders game, take an Uber back, and fly home than it would be to go spend the day, eat, park, do all the things, get Raiders tickets in Oakland. So I thought that was a very interesting thing. But
I'm gonna need some expense reports on that. I'm gonna find out some actual details on that. That sounds ridiculous. I'll trust you for it.
And that's like I'm saying. Like I didn't do any research. This is something I saw, and I was like, okay, well that's interesting. But even if it's partially true, it brings up this incredibly interesting point that getting to and from Las Vegas is cheap.
Mm-hmm. Even if it was within $20 of each other, that's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, it may not be 100% true. It may be 100% false, but it brings this interesting question. The fact that I could even believe it,
just the accessibility of it's insane.
Exactly, and so it's very interesting to say because of those factors that Las Vegas. Because I think everybody would have thought the first city you were going to say is Seattle, but to hear you say Las Vegas, that's very interesting.
Well, there'll be a lot of people waiting.
Yeah. All right. So beyond Las Vegas, who's your other city?
The second city I have listed is one that has been without basketball for many years, but did at one time have a basketball team. St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay.
Um, Another place where the age demographics, financial demographics, the median income, they all match up with what a typical NBA city would require. And while the St. Louis isn't the best choice, isn't the first choice, bringing a team back to St. Louis would be a better option than most. Let's say Mexico City is a team. Mexico City is a place that I had as not one of the better options because most of the people living in Mexico do not fit the financial demographic that you would want for a city housing an NBA team. And St. Louis, while it's not, like I said, the best option, provides a lot of stability. It has the St. Louis Blues and the St. Louis Cardinals. The Cardinals have had a devoted fan base for almost their entire existence, and that kind of fan commitment could show a pattern for any potential team to move there. And the loss of the Rams, the loss of Sam Kroenke and that investment group does put a hindrance on any ability to move a basketball team there. But there are other possibilities for getting a team to St. Louis, and it is one of the better options that we have in the continental United States.
St. Louis is a larger city. I'm not going to act like I just knew this off the top of my head. I looked it up. St. Louis is the 19th largest city in the United States. The metro area is. So it's a good-sized city. But on top of it, the thing that jumps off the page to me is that Anheuser-Busch is there. That they're a huge investor in the area. In fact, unless I'm mistaken, I mean, I'm not up on my St. Louis all that well, but I feel like the Cardinals played at a park that at one point was called Busch Stadium, Busch Garden, something along those lines. That it had Busch in the name.
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, so when you have an investment group, particularly Budweiser, who has sunk so much money into the sports world. In terms of advertising, in terms of putting their name everywhere in stadiums, in all sports, it's a very interesting question to say that perhaps that they could become a chief investor in a franchise, in an NBA franchise, because it would bring so much business to the area.
Yeah, St. Louis has a lot of potential for an NBA team. Like I said, not the best option. I have 3 other options that I would consider higher than St. Louis.
Okay.
But for the sentimental factor, I would put St. Louis up there simply for the fact that I think basketball should return to St. Louis. It's the NBA has some roots in St. Louis. For some of the more interested listeners, there's a whole backstory of the NBA having to pay money to the former owners of the St. Louis Hawks. That is an interesting read if you can find the story about it. But yeah, I would definitely, if I were the NBA, if I were Adam Silver, I would look into St. Louis and Anheuser-Busch as possible investors.
It is called Busch Stadium, by the way. I had to look that up because I was like, am I just talking out of my ass here? What's the thing? All right, so we got Las Vegas, we got St. Louis. Who's next on the list?
Next on the list would be Louisville, Kentucky.
Louisville, Kentucky. All right.
Yeah, Louisville, Kentucky. Home of the Kentucky Derby. Home of, according to Google, not fried chicken, some sort of chicken.
Okay.
And their major export would have to be the Louisville Slugger.
Okay.
Other than that, it's the same parameters as the rest of the other cities. Once again, not as good as Las Vegas, but it's has in the city alone has close to 800,000 people, which is roughly 200,000 more than Las Vegas. But of course, again, Las Vegas has people coming in and out each and every day. It has a metropolitan area around it. I saw different numbers, but Louisville has roughly I forget the number I listed, but 1.7 or something, over 1 million people live in the metropolitan area of Louisville. Louisville doesn't have the money behind it. It's one of the options that it's looking bleak for Louisville as far as someone to come in and buy the team, purchase team, which is something I got into in the article, is how much is it going to cost to bring a team to one of these cities, because the last team that was introduced in the NBA was the Charlotte Bobcats in 2004, which cost the ownership group at the time $300 million to introduce the team,
and with an existing infrastructure. The arena from the Hornets, all the things still left over. So
only 2 years later, so everything was already existing. Obviously, the NBA has changed in the past 13 years, so we've seen teams go for $2.2 billion. We also saw the Hawks go for $900 million in 2015. So what price do we see an expansion team come into the league? Is it close to the $2 billion? Is it close to the $900 million? And then do they move into an area where they can build a stadium, or do they move into an area where there's already a stadium there? And that's something I got into in the article, is what would it cost to do business with the NBA, and how willing would the NBA be, able to accept new ownership into the group?
Louisville's such an interesting city because there's such a basketball tradition in Kentucky.
Right.
With the Kentucky Wildcats playing in the NCAA. That in and of itself makes a very interesting question, because I live in North Carolina. North Carolina, known for its college sports, particularly college basketball.
Right.
And the Hornets certainly play third or fourth fiddle behind UNC, behind Duke, behind the Panthers. There is a very, very distinct line of succession when it comes to professional sports teams. So I think the question with Louisville is where does that land with UK, with Louisville, the university itself? Where would that land a professional sports team in a state that doesn't have its own professional sports team? And so that's a pretty interesting question. I'm not sure how it would all play out, but I definitely think that there are some considerations there that make for interesting theoretical questions about Louisville.
Yeah, it's definitely a state where I'm not too sure about how an NBA team would do there as far as fan base and everything goes, because, as you said, like, the commitment to college sports can be a tricky thing to work around, because you never know if a fan base is going to connect with a professional team over a college team, and that weird divide that people have over, preferring college sports to professional sports. And it's a tricky thing to work around when it comes to moving and placing teams in different areas. And that's something else I had an issue with as far as ticket sales. Actually, I looked into what teams sold the best as the past few seasons, what teams filled their arenas the most, what teams just sold them on the most tickets over the past couple of years. And I found that the majority of teams that were situated in the middle of the country sold typically the least amount of tickets.
So like Indiana, Memphis.
Indiana, Memphis, and
Oklahoma.
Timberwolves, the Nuggets, Detroit, in consecutive seasons all found themselves, most of them, in the bottom 10 of the league in attendance.
Interesting.
Of course, Cleveland and the Bulls are exceptions to this theory, but I think it is something to take into concern when building a team.
Because I think the Pacers are certainly like a parallel for if you Indianapolis and in a state that's very college sports oriented in Indiana, particularly the Hoosiers, and they love the Hoosiers and they love the Colts, and the Pacers sort of play in behind that. So I think that that's an interesting comparison city when you talk about a city like Louisville, because they don't have another professional team, so it could be a very different question, or it could be very much the same, that maybe the Kentucky Wildcats and the Louisville Cardinals take up a lot of the fan base that would be in a team, an NBA team in Louisville. So that's a pretty interesting point there. Who's your next city?
Next city is Albuquerque, New Mexico.
All right, you're gonna have to talk me into this one. Let's hear it.
Yeah, see, I knew that this one would be tricky for people to understand. Albuquerque, known mainly for its exposure on its popular TV show. For those unaware, it's known as Breaking Bad.
Okay.
So about around 1 million people live in Albuquerque.
Okay.
I have been to Albuquerque. It's a interesting place coming from the East Coast. It's a horizontal city. It's very art friendly. It's very, I would say, respectful of its history, its culture. But it's also got an interesting dynamic to it where it's part like this western town like you'd see in like Tucson or Santa Fe or something like that, Arizona. But then it's also like this has this city center where it's more like Atlanta or Phoenix, where it's getting younger, and that's what I mentioned in Albuquerque's portion of the piece, where right now Albuquerque is an older state, but I mean it's an older city, but it's projected to get a lot younger within the next 5 years, and they project that their age range from, I think I said it's 24 to 34, I think, was supposed to grow over 10% within the next 5 years, which is double the national average. And so it's a growing metropolitan area. It's a growing city, and while the economy is not the best in New Mexico, and it is, it's slightly better in Albuquerque, and it's a growing society down there, and they have their own trends, their own things that happen, and it's got this budding film film society going down there. Just filmmakers going down there.
Well, I know that they provided a lot of tax breaks when it came to Breaking Bad. That the New Mexico government, the Albuquerque city government, was very they incentivized it heavily for Breaking Bad, and that sort of opened a window for, like you said, those other filmmakers to go down there.
Right. It's an off the course choice, obviously. I'm aware that most readers aren't going to be thinking Albuquerque when they go into this, but I thought it was an interesting choice that to be considered by people.
All right. Who's you said you had one more, right?
I have one more, but it was in the piece. It is a question of whether or not one of two cities. It's Montreal or Calgary.
Montreal or Calgary. Okay. The Toronto Raptors fans are going to be mad. They don't even want one in Vancouver, which is 3,000 miles away.
Whole identity is that they're the only team in Canada. Well,
the Great White North.
Yeah, they're the North. Congrats. No, yeah, I think adding a team to either Calgary or Montreal would be a good idea for the NBA. But what I found is that Montreal is full of rich people. I'm not Montreal. Calgary is full of rich people because with their median income of over $100,000 per household, that actually puts them out of the demographic of people that actually watch basketball. I found that 13% of the people that watch basketball make over $100,000, so that immediately deterred any sort of hope for Calgary and their chances of an NBA team. Montreal just seems like the natural fit. It's a 70-minute flight from Toronto to Montreal. It's a 90-minute flight from Boston. And it like you said, Toronto is not going to be excited about a team coming to Montreal, but it has the money, it has the billionaires in-house that have the potential of getting a team there. They have the infrastructure, they have the arenas, they have. It would seem that they have everything. They have the Canadians play in Montreal. They have I think it's called the Bell Center, and it's Montreal next to Las Vegas. I felt Montreal and Las Vegas were the two real choices of NBA expansion.
I don't know that anybody's going to fight. Excuse me. I don't know that anybody's going to fight too hard against the Las Vegas team, but I certainly feel like Toronto rail pretty hard. Montreal just a little bit north and west of Vermont, so sort of in the same sphere as several teams, the Knicks, the Celtics, the Raptors. It is interesting adding another Canadian team. Canadian sports, Montreal obviously used to have the Expos. They have the Alouettes in Canadian football. Calgary has the Flames. And they also have the Stampede. That's off the top of my head. I'm not sure. I'm not the tightest on CFL team names, but it would certainly be interesting to add another Canadian team. But Vancouver, there was talk about it some years ago about adding a team. Vancouver and Toronto fought that, so it would be interesting to see how hard the ownership group in Toronto would be against Montreal, particularly with like cultural differences. Montreal's a very French-Canadian city versus Toronto's an English-speaking city. There's just a lot of questions about what the differences would be, and would they pull from the same fan base, and would they divide Canadians, and that's really interesting because it does bring up so many questions that are outside of the sphere of basketball. Including one that just occurs to me. I know that players that play in Toronto have to pay taxes in Canada as well as the United States. So how would that affect collective bargaining? And just, boy, I do not want to sit on the committee that has to answer all these questions when it comes to expansion, because I could just sit around all day and think up theoreticals that would give you trouble just to think of the answer of like, well, what are we going to do about taxes? And you're like, well, okay, that's something I hadn't considered. And I'm sure that the NBA has a guy who just puts a bug in their ear about every single thing that has to be thought through when it comes to expansion. Now, I have a question, sort of getting to the end of this, talking about the cities that you mentioned, and they all have certain merits, but a lot of people in the NBA think that an expansion draft would really weaken the depth of playoff teams. That's something that's been kicked around. Does the league have a deep enough talent pool to support another team at this point?
So with the expansion of the G League and overseas talent, and just like you look at the NBA now, and I'm pretty sure I heard someone say that it's the youngest it's ever been, and that that means one thing, it also means another. It means there's a lot of older players that still maybe have it, mentally and a little bit physically, who maybe aren't fast enough to compete on the highest level, and maybe aren't, necessary enough to give out huge contracts to, but they're still, playable. And I think the NBA is in a place where it wasn't in 2004, where we have the structure in the G League. We have an excess of players who either flamed out of the NBA who still have something, and older players that have the mind but maybe not the physical ability, or at least a lesser physical ability than they once did. And maybe they aren't, the best players, but they're not going to be what we saw out of Philly the past couple of years, when they're in the heat of the tank. My method of solving this, while it may not be the best idea, if I were the commissioner, though.
I'm interested to hear that.
Yeah, if I were the commissioner and I had to solve this issue, I would have these expansion teams operate as a D League team for one season, like a probationary season.
Okay.
And while that obviously that has its own flaws, its own things that I'd have to convince ownership groups of, I think that would be the most responsible thing to do. Just so the ownership group, the coaches, the training staff, whoever they hire, have an idea of what this team is, what it's like to be on a team if they've never worked before. So they get a grasp of what this is like, and they can work on building a team. And then year after the probationary period, we add them into the draft. If we add 2 teams, we split it up. Yeah, 1 team in the lottery at 15. And is it the lottery?
So what happened in 2004 was they put Charlotte in, and they didn't put them in the lottery. They gave them a static pick. They were number 4. They ended up swapping with the Clippers and ended up number 2, but that was a whole different thing. But I guess the idea would be that if you put an expansion team into the draft, that their position would be number 4 in the draft, which is weird because in the NFL, the last team that they added, the Houston Texans, got the number 1 pick, and they took David Carr and whatever with that. But it brings about a certain interesting question when it comes to adding talent, because the last time they did this, the Charlotte Bobcats had one of the worst rosters. I mean, you can look at it. Just go to Basketball Reference and look up the 0405 Charlotte Bobcats.
I was in fear immediately.
Yeah, exactly. Like when you look at that roster and you see the names that are on there, it's a little bit terrifying because that's a question that immediately needs addressing when it comes to expansion teams, and I think that's one of those things that you're going to have difficulty. I mean, Keith Boggins, Primoz Brezic, Matt Carroll, Kareem Rush, Steve Smith, Gerald Wallace, who happened to be a bright spot when it came to the Bobcats, Jason Capono, Eddie House, and then their draft pick, Emeka Okafor. I mean, who...
greatest player of all time.
For whatever reason, didn't turn out to be a great NBA player. But when you look at that roster, what you see is a bunch of role players, and then a guy who could have been a star in Emeka Okafor. But it's a very, very bad roster. And to further that, they went 18-64 that season, and did not look hopeful for many years as a franchise. So offsetting that is a question that I think has to be answered before. How do you field a competitive team? And I think that's the question that has to be answered before you can start to look at expansion, is how can we immediately field a team in whatever city that will draw fans, that will be appealing?
And that's a very serious question that I try to grapple with in the piece, but ultimately I found that there's no real answer other than them operating as a D-League team but not actually playing, and then drafting in the draft, but not actually playing the NBA. And there isn't a great solution to finding a competitive team straight out of expansion.
For sure.
Unless, of course, it's like they've already had the established talent.
All right, one last question before I let you go. What do you think is the likelihood, after you did all this research, what do you think the likelihood of an expansion team in the near future is?
The likelihood. Well, given the news about Seattle's interest in getting a new team, I saw that they put forward movements to make it easier for a team to come there. The accessibility, as we talked about, Las Vegas. I think the likelihood probably be about there's like a 50% chance we get 2 teams in the next 5 years.
2 teams you said 50-50 shot to get 2 teams in the next 5 years. Well,
yeah.
Okay, that'd be exciting. I mean, it certainly is going to put a strain on the talent pool, but like you said, the league is deeper than it has been.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's so much public interest and money interest. Just Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. If Steve Ballmer can move the Clippers to Seattle, or if he could sell the Clippers and buy the Seattle team, he would in a moment's notice. And just the backing behind moving back to Seattle is just so strong that it just feels imminent.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, it'll cause moves like the Chris Paul move did, or the Warriors, they caused this whole rupture of moves this offseason. The backing behind Seattle, at the very least, will cause at least one expansion. And Las Vegas, in my opinion, seems like the obvious choice. Like I mentioned, there are others, but Seattle and Las Vegas feel like they could happen in the next 5 years. Interesting.
All right. Well, that's good to hear. I'll be interested to see how this shapes out, and more importantly, I'll be interested to read the article when it goes up on the 94 Feet Report. Jay, thanks for coming on the show, man. Thanks for being a part of it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, and just walking us through all NBA expansion. You want to get a quick plug in for anything? I mean, I know you're working on the article. You want to get a quick plug in for anything else before we roll out of here?
Follow me on Twitter at PocketSizeJ. Feel free to at me if any compliments you have of my opinions.
What about criticisms?
No, well, I mean, there's only be compliments because all my opinions are right.
Okay. All right, man. Well, I appreciate you coming. Appreciate you coming on the show, and can't wait to talk to you a little bit more as the regular season rolls on, no matter what the subject is. Thanks to my guest Jae Gongora of the 94 Feet Report for coming on and talking about expansion teams with us. It was an interesting subject, one that I'm sure we'll hear more of in the coming days, as maybe we inch closer to a team in Seattle, or maybe in Las Vegas, like Jay alluded to. But anyway, make sure you're following the show on Twitter, at N1Analytics, or _Alex_West. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, listening on SoundCloud, iTunes, wherever it is that you get your podcast. You can get the And1 podcast there. So until next time, I'm your host, Alex West. Good night.